Edina Edina Park and Rec Commission meeting. The first item on our agenda is the roll call. And I'll turn that to Janet. Thanks.
Commissioner McCauley?
Here.
Commissioner Burke?
Here.
Commissioner Nelson?
Here.
Commissioner Good?
Here.
Commissioner McCormick?
Here.
Commissioner Strother?
Here.
Commissioner Miller?
Here.
Commissioner Darlene?
Here.
Commissioner Keeley?
Here.
Commissioner Shepard?
Here.
Okay, thank you, Janet. The next item is the approval of the meeting agenda. If I could have a motion to approve that.
So moved.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that passed. Then the next item is approval of our meeting minutes from our December 12th, 2017 meeting.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, passed. So on the next item, we have a special presentation from the Transportation Commission. And so we'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
I'm Mindy Aller. I'm one of the commissioners on the Edina Transportation Commission. And thank you for adding us to your agenda tonight. We are deep in comprehensive planning, as I'm sure you are as well. And as part of that, we are going to the other boards and commissions to get input to make sure, is there anything big about transportation that you're thinking about that we want to make sure we don't miss? And more than anything, make sure we don't put anything conflicting between our different sections together. So we're really interested in being supportive of each other as commissions and making sure that this comprehensive plan is really a useful document for the city, for the staff, and for our citizens. So we're excited to be part of it. I just want a little bit of context that when I talk about transportation, I want to be clear that we're talking about all modes of transportation. So motorized, non-motorized, single occupancy, multiple occupancy, mass transportation, public and private. So we may have mass transportation that becomes private entities as well. Active transportation such as walking and biking, but then also the whole system and infrastructure that is required to support all of that. So I'm really looking at all pieces of transportation. And with that, I just have some questions for you to see if you have some ideas for this for me. So I don't have a formal presentation at all. Can you tell me what your highest level areas of focus are for Edina in the next 10 years? So like, what are the things that jump out at you most from your planning process so far?
A lot of ours, which came out of our strategic plan, is paths and connecting our parks and accessibility to the parks.
And when you say accessibility, what are you thinking?
Ability to get there in a safe manner, then also just the accessibility of the equipment and things at the parks.
And do you think of also like people of all abilities as well? I know that in we're just finishing the new bike pedestrian plan, and it includes the grand rounds that's in the Park and Rec strategic plan. I know they have a form of that's in the bike ped plan.
Yeah, good. And in a lot of ours is about paths and trails and things like that too, which would probably need to be connected with the transportation group.
One thing to add on top of that, in addition, would be the signage and making sure that people understand not only that we have different places and how to get to them, but if I'm at Todd Park and I want to go to Countryside Park, how do I get there? And so I think that's more of a, not today, but a longer term plan of making sure that we have some form of wayfinding out there would be definitely a goal for us in 10 years.
Another piece I might add as well, part of our comprehensive plan will be developing master park plans for all of our major parks. And each time we do that, we will have residents that will address things like access to the park, parking issues, or even just capability to drop off if there's activity happening at the parks. So I think as we think about how we get to and circumvent the different parks, those are things that constantly come up to us that we try to embed in our master plan thinking. We may not control it if it's city streets and other things, but they're certainly becoming pinch points and other issues for residents and better use of the parks themselves.
And what about non-transportation related priorities?
Just for overall
For
comprehensive.
Parks and Rec? Mhm.
So the way we've structured our comp plan is based off of a comprehensive strategy, a strategic plan that we did a couple years ago, and we have 5 developmental areas. And so just to kind of recap those for you, they would start with natural resources and sustainable parks. So the whole issue of sustainability and maintaining and improving our natural resources. Second up on that would then be parks, open spaces, and trails. So the actual assets themselves of the parks. Third are our recreation facilities, how we utilize them, maintain them, make sure that they are as economically feasible and sustainable as possible. Following that would be recreation programs and the things that we plan in our facilities, in our parks. And the 5th is around finance and management. So organizationally and economically, how do we sustain and grow Edina Park and Rec programs?
I'm looking at my second question and realizing, well, you've answered some of it, but I'll read it anyhow because we're kind of trying to keep consistent questions between commissions. Of these areas of focus that we've been talking about, whether they're actually, I know you're still in process on your comp plan just like we are, but which do you believe are impacted by or have an impact on transportation, and how are they impacted?
I certainly think the first aspect around our trails and where we're building trails, one thing is to say let's have trails embedded in a master park plan itself, but the other then goes towards the connectivity, and we do get a lot of inputs from the community around the trail access, either from getting from one park to the other or getting to some of the trails that are being developed cutting across Edina. And so how do we make sure that we connect to those as well? Another is then just getting access to the different nodes within the community of Edina, whether that is one of our recreation facilities or if it's one of our parks. I think people are becoming less excited about always having to jump in a car and do it that way, right? And so I think that's one that certainly comes up as an important challenge for us as we try to think through it. Another idea, I don't know if it's feasible or creative, was thinking about the connectivity was, well, how about let's see, where did I put it? I tried to write it down here. An electric bus that would be a constant circulator from different points in Edina that would have a schedule that people knew it was running and could hop on and get from one node to another, one park to another, 50th in France to some other part of Edina, that would provide alternative access to having to jump in our own automobiles.
So in that case, not just connecting park to park, but connecting other parts of Edina to our parks and to other parts of Edina.
Yep. So those would be some of the things that come to mind from my perspective.
So to that point, you see in a lot of our plans for our parks, whether today or tomorrow, we have a trail system that we lay out. And then you guys have talked about a trail system or grand rounds that you've laid out. Has any work been done to see if those points are interconnecting at intelligent spots? So in other words, if there's a bike path coming out of Braemar, is it actually connecting up in the right place with the grand rounds? I know Fred Richards is because it goes right through it, but I don't know if I've ever seen an overlay of those two things to see if we're actually meeting, so that a path that comes out of one of our parks doesn't just come out at a dead end and then you got to go a block and a half to get onto the Grand Rounds path. So,
Which just makes me think, have you seen a draft copy at all of the bike and pedestrian plan we haven't had the final draft yet, but I'm going to bring that up at our next commission meeting to make sure that that comes through this group, because I believe the consultants had looked at what was recommended by Parks and Rec, but if they haven't actually come to you, I think I'll make sure that that happens.
Yeah, I mean,
So that-
we're going through some plans now, Braemar being a good example, Arden Park being a good example, Fred Richards. So I think it's pretty dynamic still on our side of things, so it'd probably be a good idea.
That's always the lovely thing about planning, right? Everything, everything can change and will shift at some point, but we do our best. Any other thoughts on? So what are your biggest concerns about transportation in Edina?
I think probably as we've looked at some pretty large parcels of property, Member Miller talked about Arden and Fred Richards and Braemar. I think the one thing that we hear from residents is parking, and how do we keep the flow of parking so that the amenities are accessible and allow people to park and stay and enjoy the amenities as they want, but is also, as limited as possible in terms of disruption to the neighborhoods that surround them. I think that is rang loud and clear in some of the discussions that we've had, and I think while it's in some ways probably a really difficult, with the way that the city was laid out many years ago, I think that is the thing as we look at new stuff and things, and how can we be creative and try to figure that out as best we can. So,
And to that point, I think not just cars, but how can people get to parks safely, even if they're not using a car, particularly like kids. We have some parks where we have great paths and bike lanes and others that are not, and looking at that as we build in our future designs.
Yeah, that's part of that accessibility that I heard you say multiple times. That
The thing I would also add is looking at different projects or locations that are potentials. For example, the lid, we've called it the lid, I believe, as well as Grandview, looking at areas that have an opportunity for development but are already currently bottlenecks in terms of traffic flow, as well as if you ever want to cross the street safely in those traffic flowed crazy areas, particularly over like on Eden Avenue, how do we make sure that those are there's surveys done and we understand the impacts of not only just that area but all the areas around it. So if you added a lid, what other bottlenecks are we creating that don't even exist yet, in addition to the bottlenecks that are already there? So that's one of my biggest concerns, is understanding how the different things we do impact the traffic flow.
And building on what Corin just said, as we look at the lid and changing some transportation hub areas, just sometimes putting in a bike lane doesn't make it safe, especially for kids. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be what we've had to do because the city's, the land, not having a lot of land and being built years ago, but it's a safety more than accessibility in my mind.
Yeah, we also, as part of the bike ped plan, there was a study presented that 60% of those who would ride their bike won't do it until they have a protected bike facility. So not a painted stripe on the road, but actually separated from traffic. So that's something that really gave us pause and thinking about if we want them to be really accessible. And yes, I always think about the smallest kids when we think about safety and what I want my 7-year-old on that bike path. Yeah. The other thing that we keep thinking about when we talk about parking too is we look ahead to what transportation and things like electric cars or autonomous cars, and will that actually reduce the need for parking? So when you think about your parking areas in your park, how could they be converted to something else in the future if there isn't the same need for parking later on? That's always.
And then to build on that, assuming these cars are actually safe, making sure that they truly are. So if a kid is to walk across and it's not like we're making eye contact at a person, you're actually trusting this automated vehicle to actually stop for a kid who may be small and, chase after a ball. I mean, I'm over by Todd Park, but just the street over that goes around Todd Park, it's not very busy until it's busy, and when it's busy, it's very unsafe, and it takes more than just, having a crosswalk. It's, patrols or whatever the case may be to make sure it's enforced, because that's my biggest scare of having a car that's automated, is that how do we make sure that safety is really followed?
Mm-hmm. It also makes me think of then, as we're planning our transportation systems for them, do we need to have more safety zones, more spaces, gaps between where the traffic is flowing to ensure that?
And this has a little bit to do with the parks, but in general, I'm curious, because Edina, I think the way we're situated in the metro area, we seem to be a cut-through for traffic. So there's a lot of people that are zipping through, trying to stay off a 62 or 100, and they're going through side roads. And I don't know if you guys have touched on that at all. When 169 was closed and we had all the cut-through, it became a very major issue.
We heard a lot about that one.
Yeah,
when 169 was under construction, yes.
And there were some unique, short-term solutions to that, but I don't know if you guys have touched on that at all regarding safety just in general, because of that cut-through in the morning and the evening. It can get pretty dangerous.
That's a good thing to know. So then my last question is, how can our commissions continue to work better in the future for Edina, if you have other ideas?
I think for one, I'd build off of the master plans for our parks. I think those would be a good connectivity point for us to, whether, as we say, we certainly and naturally think about parking, but we should also be thinking about if there are any upcoming changes on roadways to get to the parks, to move through those areas. Question I might have for you as well is, as you envision going forward, would your commission expect we will see many more roundabouts throughout Edina, and where might those be? I know when I was recently at small area plan for Cahill and 70th, I heard someone mention that Cahill and Lewis, right at the Lewis Park Road, where it's Dewey Hill and Cahill intersection, where there's a natural triangle right now, right? And someone said, well, why isn't that a rotary? Wouldn't that help with traffic flow through there? So I wonder if there are more of those that might be coming in that could be adjacent to parks that we ought to be aware of and thinking of.
We do talk about them, and the one concern we have when we talk about roundabouts is that exactly where pedestrians and bikes go in a roundabout is still a little confusing, partly because they're new, so we are always looking at what's proper signage and such like that before we just add more, to make sure that it does, especially around parks. That would be a conversation, because you're going to have a lot more bike and pedestrian traffic.
Well, and apparently from some of the tire tracks I see in fresh snow, it's a little confusing how people drive around roundabouts as well. They just right through. But I think that's one that would be natural for us. As we're doing a master plan, then we should certainly have some touch points to see. We're talking about a parkway through a particular park at Braemar, for example. How do we make sure that our two commissions are closely aligned and at least a discussion and awareness?
Yeah, that's great. And we think about, too, with new developments and what things might we recommend to the Planning Commission to incentivize developers around encouraging other modes of transportation and making it more accessible for their residents, if it's a residential building, or for their workers to be using other modes of transportation than just single occupancy vehicles. And I would think if it's one that's a development that's near a park, maybe there's something to suggest that would enhance park, that if the developer would so choose to include it, is there some incentive on that? Who knows? This is the big dreaming, because at this moment we're at the big dreaming stage of planning. We get to the concrete, clearly defined steps after this after this part. But thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is community comment. Do we have anybody who wanted to make a comment this evening? Okay, move on then to our reports and recommendations. And Anne, did you want to kick this next section off? Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, everyone. First of all, I would like to introduce my partner on this project, Renee Clark from the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, and we also have Ross Bittner from our engineering department here to answer any questions this evening. So Renee and I will be tag teaming a little bit. For those of you that didn't notice on your way in, we did hold an open house this evening for the Arden Park 30% design process, and we had a really great turnout. It was a really good experience. So we would like to just start talking about a little bit background of the project, just to refresh your memory as to how we got to the point where we are currently. We'll talk a little bit about the process for design development. Some of our goals, and we'll talk in more specifics about the 30% design, and then a little bit more about next steps. So with that, what was I starting?
I can take it from here.
We're going on the flow.
Yeah, a little project background. We want to give you sort of the basis for why Arden and why now, and it's sort of a two-part strategy of how watershed district goals and strategies align with the City of Edina's strategies for parks in your 2015 plan. So Ann and I will talk about that, and then kind of bring us to how we arrived to today with the development of the concept plan and a little summary of that process. First, as a bit of background, Minnehaha Creek is a regional ecological system that flows through 5 cities, about 22 miles from the headwaters of Lake Minnetonka to Minnehaha Falls. There's about a 47 square mile drainage area that drains to Minnehaha Creek. That area of Minnetonka, Hopkins, St. Louis Park, Edina, and Minneapolis, as you can imagine, has changed a lot in the last century, half century. Development has increased urban polluted stormwater runoff to the creek. It has filled wetlands along the creek corridor. The creek's been dammed, ditched, development kind of right up to the edge of the creek, sort of ignoring the asset value of green space and water through a community. So the district is focused in this 47 square mile geography with a vision to rectify all these issues. And we do that on an opportunity basis with project partners like the City of Edina in this project, where we can intersect our strategies for cleaning water and restoring the corridor with city and community private development strategies for growth, land use change, and infrastructure improvements. So that's leading up to our partnership today. The City and Watershed District has a history of coordination primarily through our regulatory program with engineering on permits. In this area, the West 54th Street Community Engagement for those street reconstruction projects and the bridge projects started a number of years ago, and at that time, the district, through our coordination with city staff, said this intersects with a known impairment in Minnehaha Creek of this existing dam at West 54th that was identified as a cause to ecological impairment to Minnehaha Creek in several studies by the Watershed District. So we started exploring in 2014-15 the opportunity to remove the dam, which has led to the development of our more recent partnership to explore that dam removal, but in a larger context of park and water quality improvements, kind kind of guided by the strategies of your 2015 plan, as well as the district strategies for how we partner and integrate our clean water improvements with community improvements.
As we started to talk about this plan, this one's not working. Is it on? Okay, thank you. As we started to talk about this project with the watershed district, we talked about a lot of our shared goals and a lot of our priorities, and it was actually before even our strategic plan was started. And once we really sat down and started working on the plan, we were able to identify a lot of areas that we felt were directly responding to some of the things that we identified in the strategic plan. So I'd like to just refresh your memory on some of these items. Some of our goals were to protect, enhance, and restore the city's natural resources and natural areas, create more resilient and sustainable parks, facilities, and landscapes, protect and restore Edina's water resources, and increase facility accessibility and consistency throughout the city. We also had several strategies that aligned specifically with this project. We wanted to increase connections and access to natural areas and environmental resources, coordinate with the engineering department to meet changing regulations and integrate into park master planning projects. Again, partner with the engineering department to identify opportunities to increase water quality throughout the city and identify opportunities to treat city stormwater on park property to benefit both. Provide more active and passive recreation opportunities and educational efforts focused on water resources. Create a plan for replacement of outdated facilities, including the Arden Park shelter building, and replace old and inadequate playground equipment. And we also had some key recommendations that align very well with this project. We wanted to provide greater access for passive recreation and interpretation, protect and improve Edina's water resources, provide more environmental education opportunities, replace insufficient play areas and playgrounds and provide new facilities to fill those gaps, improve branding and wayfinding to parks, provide additional community gathering areas, develop community-driven master plans for parks, and replace or decommission community park buildings that have outlived their lifespan. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Renee.
So recognizing these really nice intersection of shared goals between the city and the watershed district, we've partnered through a memorandum of agreement that was approved by our agencies in mid-2016 to produce a master plan for Arden Park. The plan removes the existing dam at West 54th Street and remeanders Minnehaha Creek. It provides increased access and recreational opportunities to the creek throughout Arden Park, trail connections to neighborhoods on both sides of Arden Park and through Arden Park, has regional stormwater treatment up to 100 acres in total, and that will get refined as we get into more detailed design. And then the master plan calls for updating the aging shelter building on site as well as the playground. The concept master plan was developed over a 12-month public input process that included a total of 5 community meetings, several check-ins with council and our board of managers. The final concept plan was approved by the city and our board just a couple of months ago after public hearings, and now we are in the early stages of design development, which was just authorized. So tonight we are with the community and the Parks Commission, and then later this month with City Council and our Board of Managers to provide our first bit of progress towards 30% design of the park. So the overall process and schedule takes this first check-in as we are responding to some early things in design with creek alignment, trail configurations, and putting some detail to stormwater. Those details all get refined over the coming months, and our next check-in and decision point is in May, where we'll have kind of a 60% design that's got some design level detail and further refined cost estimates. There's an official action requested then of council and our board of managers to proceed based on that more detailed information of park planning. And then there's a final approval later this year in September of what will be a 90% plan, where the last bit of comments will come in, and Parks Council and our board will have that final approval to tell us to proceed into getting bids for construction. And then all goes well, we'll be constructing this time next year, with shelter building and upgraded playground anticipated to follow then later in 19. Our design team, some of you may have met Jonathan Kusa from Interfluve, who was out in the hallway earlier tonight. He was our consultant during the concept plan development. They're a engineer that focuses on creek restoration and dam removal. And supported by his team is Wank Associates, who is looking at stormwater and geotechnical analysis, and then a landscape architecture firm, Hart Howerton, all of which have worked as a project team for the district on other projects in Hopkins and St. Louis Park with us, and we're part of this project team during concept development. The design goals, moving out of concept stage into design, I have summarized here, and were really themes echoed throughout the concept plan development process, and I think we heard more of tonight. Maintaining rustic character of the park. People really appreciate the natural play and that rustic experience. Fishing, in-stream recreation. All are going to be focuses on, all will be part of the focus during design development of the creek and access to the creek. Aging park facilities, we heard comments on throughout concept plan development. Public safety was a goal at the onset, concerns about crossing West 54th Street. And then from some of our shared goals, improved biological and geological function of the creek itself. It'll be returned to a flowing system with pools and riffles and woody debris, all for habitat and better health of the creek. The corridor, the upland and floodplain forest around it will be improved with new plantings to increase diversity, and then invasive species management, particularly buckthorn. And then there's a regional stormwater treatment component. We'll review the 30% design, the creek alignment, the updated concept plan overall, stormwater, and then we'll discuss our strategies as we consider the natural resource enhancement opportunities. When we left council and our board of managers, the first thing we said that we would look at is the creek alignment. That, with respect to how it impacts trees, was really one of the louder concerns we heard at the end of the concept plan development. The image before you shows in lighter gray the alignment from the concept plan that was approved. The brighter blue is the new stream alignment, and that depicts sort of the corridor of the stream, including the stream channel. This alignment was field fit, avoids specimen trees that we heard were important, oaks, and kind of preserving the green open space where the free skate is, you'll notice. We're looking to avoid willows, particularly the ones down by the dam. Here's a side-by-side of the concept plan on the right that was approved and the updated concept plan on the left. We better dialed in trail alignments. There are, the new creek alignment is shown, and I think what's maybe better depicted on the next image is how we're thinking about stormwater management and some of those practices. So at the location of the playground, if this maybe comes through a little tough on the screen with the size of my image, but we've got envisioned underground treatment, which would be below a new playground area, treating kind of the bulk of the water that comes from about an 80-acre area that goes all the way up to 50th in France, that directly discharges into Minnehaha Creek today. That water then would be treated secondarily through what we're calling biofiltration swales, and images of what those look like are along the right side of the plan. But generally, the green lighter cross hatched along the trails from the north end of the park to the shelter building, as well as along the inside of the other side of the green space along Minnehaha, would handle flow from the underground treatment to those above ground swales. The above ground swale that kind of follows the creek also takes high flows when the creek is really high and maybe there's a big storm event after. It will do a couple of things, keep the water kind of out of the park and provide a flow path. The biggest thing we are looking at is keeping the shelter building area and terrace dry and accessible even in really high flows. So that practice would be designed to do that as well. Is there anything with trails you'd like to highlight?
I think at this point, it's important to note that we are only at the 30% design phase. So we really didn't start even looking at trails until late last week. So I just want you all to know that there is likely change that will happen as part of this plan. It's not typical that we report back as often and especially as early as we are. So I just want everyone to be aware that there probably will be some changes along this plan as we go through. Regarding trails specifically, we did make some changes to the plan. Looking side by side, you'll see that the trails have been slightly realigned. And we did eliminate a little bit of the trail on the very east side of the park. One thing that I would like to hear feedback from the Parks and Rec Commission tonight is on the trails that you see. One thing that we heard feedback from the open house tonight from residents was some like the circular trails throughout the park system, and some weren't as fond of the circular trails throughout the park system, specifically the trail along Brookview. So I'd be very interested in hearing your feedback as to the trail system that you're seeing and some of the alignments that you're seeing this evening. We do have 2 nature trails that we're proposing. One is on the east side of the park along Minnehaha. However, it's down a hill in the more natural area of the park. There currently is not a trail there. We felt that that would be a really great opportunity for a couple things. First of all, it would be a great opportunity to get people down into the park in an area that is currently really not accessible for a lot of the year. That would be a more natural surface. We're still talking about trail surfaces, but probably would be some sort of a crushed stone surface. It would also potentially give people that are using the creek for recreation, say tubing, and they wanted to maybe make a loop and get out before the dam, it would give people an opportunity to stay down in the park to loop back as opposed to going up on the sidewalk. We also did add a nature trail. This was in the initial concept, more on the northwest corner of the park. Provides a little bit of a boardwalk and a stairway down into the park where there currently is just a dirt trail that really isn't very easy, very safe, or very accessible. So it gives a couple of different opportunities to access the more natural areas of the park that are very informal right now. So if you have any feedback on the trails, I'd be happy to take it now, or we can continue on through the rest of the presentation as well.
I just have a question. It's probably more general since we talk a lot about a lot of different trails and all of the different stuff on our work plan, but what's the life expectancy of these crush trails? I mean, I guess I think people walking on them and riding bikes on them, stuff gets pushed to the side and displaced, and so what? Maybe I just don't understand how the materials actually fold into each other and hold their shape and stuff like that. But just curiosity. I know that we don't want to do asphalt because it doesn't necessarily flow within the natural look, but
Sure.
just was wondering.
There are different types of trail systems, certainly, and we could answer that question very specifically when we have a specific product in mind. We are working with our park maintenance division. Obviously, that's something that they're very interested in as well. Some of the different types of materials that we've been talking about, though, is some sort of a crushed stone that melds very well together, so it tends to hold its shape. Certainly there would be some maintenance that would be required with the trail, but honestly it wouldn't be significant. One thing that we talked about in this area specifically, there could be some flooding, there could be some debris that we would need to clean up at some point. I would see honestly that as even a little bit more of an issue because it is a relatively flat area that we're referring to. But it's a great question, and as we get into more specific trail treatments, we can answer that more specifically.
So Ann, what was the reasoning that they didn't want the trail along the Brookview Avenue? Was there any?
What I personally heard, and Renee can jump in as well, what I personally heard was people walked in the street over there and that they felt it was just fine to continue to walk in the street.
Yeah, I could add to that a little bit too. I overheard some conversations, I think from people that lived on Brookview and potentially didn't want the sight lines of a sidewalk on the other side, but also part of it was, the street is used today and it's just fine, so why do we need to spend the money on a sidewalk? We could spend that money on something else. And again, just listening to it, my reaction was thinking about the design goal of public safety, that I wasn't very excited about thinking that we would enhance the park, bring potentially more users to the park, and yet still have them walking along a street. Wouldn't like that situation if something happened to someone walking on the street.
Yeah, that would be my thought too, and I like the fact that that provides a connection into the park in a lot of different areas off of that street. So,
And I will say, this is an opportunity to provide a path without having to talk to folks about encroaching on their lawn, right? And it does provide a nice loop around the park. I guess I would say I think that the general concept of the paths here sort of are going in the direction of what our goals are about providing more connectivity, providing more walking and passive uses. So, that street may not have a lot of traffic on it now. We just heard from the Transportation Commission and talked about changing traffic patterns. But I think long term, it would be an asset to the park to have a loop and a dedicated walking path. So.
And I know on the other side of the park, they put in a sidewalk a couple of years ago, and I've heard a lot of positive comments about that. I'm sure there was some pushback before that went in, but I mean, most people generally really like it. I lived in that area, and it would have been great to have had that sidewalk at the time. I think from a safety issue, it's something for kids, for bikes, kids on bikes. It's something that's necessary. And I support the looping of the trails. I think people just expect that on a trail system for them to loop or be able to get to different, either the point of entry they came in on, or different areas of the park.
and one other question, down on 54th Street where it's yellow on the new, is that all new, that entire proposed sidewalk extension?
On the south side of 54th Street?
Yeah.
There is a section on the very west side that is new. When you look under the TH of 54th and to the east, that sidewalk is existing. There is just a small section on the west side. From the 5 of 54th and over, where there isn't currently a sidewalk. And we have heard from residents as part of this process that they feel that it's not safe, that they have to step out into the street, and there is a light pole and there are some trees in that area. So they asked if we would consider extending that sidewalk to Brookview.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And I like the fact that it's about safety and just making the park easier for people to get to. So
I have two things. One of them, I apologize that I not already know the answer to this. Can you help me understand the difference between the solid lines and the dotted lines?
In the concept plan, do you remember?
Sure. In the original concept plan, they were kind of meant to depict existing and proposed. The solid line on Minnehaha and the sidewalk on 54th was existing, and then the dotted lines are proposed. Looking to the updated concept plan, we just tried to label the trails really for what they were instead of using those different designs to depict them.
So the only ones that are dotted now on the updated are the ones that are more of the crushed natural and then the proposed border.
Yes.
Yes. That makes sense. So thank you on that. So the only thing else I was going to add on that was kind of what we had talked about before with the words. The gal who was here before. We talked about how transportation, thank you. Overlaying how this all connects to the other broader systems of Edina. So say I did do the circular trail, and I think that's great that we can do it, but how does it also lay into, at which point can I get off and keep on biking on the bike trail? I think that would be helpful to understand where can I bike into here to get around the loop, and where can I bike out? Is the same entry point, do I always enter on the same and go around the circle and leave it, or can I go around halfway and keep on going? I think something like that would be helpful to understand how that all fits in the more grand plan.
Those are great points. Thank you. And it gives me an opportunity to speak to that a little bit. Ross is here from our engineering department, and I just want to let you all know that whenever we're doing any master plans for parks, or whenever the engineering department, on the other hand, is doing any street reconstruction projects or any sidewalk reconstruction projects, we work very closely. Our departments work very closely together. So we make sure to coordinate the different projects, whether it ends up being a road that's going in where we'll include a sidewalk, like we did at Strachauer, for those of you that were on the commission a few years ago, or vice versa. In this situation where we're doing a master plan for a park, we always look at all of the different transportation elements between our two departments. So I just wanted to take that opportunity to let you know something that you probably wouldn't know from an internal perspective.
Okay. I think we'll talk about then the strategies for the natural resource enhancement. This is the woodland and the corridor along the creek and the slope along Brookview. Tree preservation and kind of maintaining the natural and rustic character of the park, natural resources, were all themes and concerns about the project from the public as we went through the concept plan development process. Today we, at this point in design, we still can't and haven't been able to say this many trees. What we can speak to, though, are our strategies for enhancing the function and value of the natural resource corridor along the creek and through our park. Invasive species removal and management is a big one. Buckthorn really comprises the understory of the slope along Brookview. Having a robust planting that increases diversity of that shrub layer as well as trees will be important. The riparian forest, kind of that flat land along the creek, which will go from kind of ponded backwater to a more riparian forest condition, is critical for many types of birds as habitat, particularly in an urban environment where there isn't a lot of it. So improving that quality by enhancing diversity. Ash tree management, which I'll kind of turn over to Ann. We've also brought the city forester on the design team, and he's been advising on these strategies as well. Generally looking at unhealthy trees that pose safety concerns, and that's being advised through our experts on the project team. Laura Damianchich from our department at the Watershed District and your city forester and the rest of the team. And then what we've heard from the public about specimen trees, you know, really nice oaks in the park, large willows that people really appreciate, the kind of character and aesthetic they provide. So those are our overall strategies as we move into design detail.
So Renee mentioned ash trees. As she said earlier, we are not to the point where we have a number of trees that we would be proposing to remove in this project. But one thing that has been further refined for us as we've gotten into the design phase is a very specific count of ash trees in the park. I'm sure all of you are aware of emerald ash borer. We haven't had any confirmed cases of emerald ash borer in Edina, but we have in the adjacent communities, so it really is only a matter of time before we're going to have emerald ash borer in our community as well. And this was a little surprising to me. In this park, we have 111 ash trees. Out of a total of 620 or 630 total trees. So one thing that I'd be very interested in your input on is how we want to handle ash trees in the park. We have obviously a variety of different opportunities here. We could just remove the ash trees as we are required as part of the project for creek alignment or for trails. We could say we want to take a certain percentage of ash trees, or we could be more aggressive and say we know that these trees are going to die. It's probably not going to be too long. We're in here working on a project. We have a tree replacement budget. We could replace practically as many trees as we want as part of this project. Should we go in and remove all the ash trees and do selective replacement of a higher quality tree and a more diverse tree specimen throughout the entire park? So I know I'm just throwing this at you right now. You can give me some feedback now, or I'd be happy to take feedback at any stage in the process as well.
What would an expert say?
I have asked our staff expert, and he said he would like to see the ash trees go. So he is very interested in replacing ash trees with a high quality tree replacement. So his advice would be to remove as many ash trees as we can replace reasonably.
So I did hear from folks that were concerned about tree removal. And I guess I would just flag that if we're going to do a replacement of the 111 trees, that's going to be a big visual disruption to the park. And even if you're replacing it with pretty mature new trees, it won't be the same as the trees that are there. And so just making sure that the community that surrounds the park understands that it's a long-term investment in the park. I think that's going to be the balance, because it'll be a tough transition right away for the folks who are really concerned about the immediate impact that this project will have on the aesthetic and the natural look of the park.
Thank you.
And what would a replacement plan be? To your point, you take out a, 60-year-old tree to replace it with a seedling, or a 1-year-old tree, or a 5-year-old tree, or
we'd be able to talk to you more specifically about that when we have more specific direction. We have some budgets for trees, and we would have to refine that a little bit more when we look at quantities that we need. I can tell you that the experience that we've had in our forestry division as we've been replacing trees, it's going to be no surprise the larger trees that we are able to replace, the more likelihood they have of survival. So we would try to replace the trees with as large a tree as we possibly could and as we could afford, depending upon how many we decide to replace as well.
You said that there's 600 and some trees in Arden Park. Those are wanted trees, so they're not invasive species trees?
That is all the trees.
That's the trees 8 inches or larger. So
Okay.
it doesn't account for, smaller.
So
But-
buckthorn wouldn't be
No.
considered a tree?
No.
Okay. All right.
And as you,
So 111 out of those 600 and some, and then are there any others that are also at risk? Elm? Do we know that? Or would it be
We do.
strictly the ash?
Yep, we do, as we've been going through a creek alignment. As Renee said, we had our city forester working side by side with us to help with an alignment to save the most desirable trees. And if there was a situation where there was a tree that either wasn't in good condition or was a less desirable tree, we helped that select our route. But we haven't gone through and said there are any other species of trees specifically that we would like to look at, like we are ash trees.
Great.
So Ann, with the realignment, how many trees are taken out just due to that fact?
At this stage, Brenda, we're not prepared to say, just because we feel like there is a significant chance that the alignment will change again. And so as we get to the 60% design phase, we'll be in better shape to be able to say that.
and what's the policy now on the parkland when ash trees are infected? What do we do?
We have been selectively removing what we would consider to be more of a specimen ash tree. For example, we had several in Lewis Park that were really kind of standalone specimen trees that we would really miss if that tree were to die. And we received a grant and we replaced, I forget the number actually, but we replaced, I would say, a couple of dozen ash trees with a higher quality tree. If the ash trees currently, a lot of like what we see at Arden Park, are in groups in a very natural area of a park, we're leaving those alone at this point. So we've gone through the entire park system and we've identified kind of the standalone, more specimen ash trees. And we honestly didn't have that many of those. And I think the majority of them have already been addressed. This just creates a unique opportunity for us, especially where there are so many. It creates a unique opportunity and kind of a unique challenge for us to decide how we want to manage too, because this is not something that we typically would do. We're not going into another park like Bredesen Park and going to start to remove groups of ash trees. Honestly, it wouldn't be affordable. But this is an opportunity where there are so many to be able to make a positive improvement and be able to come back and replace these trees.
So if they were left there and they did become infected, what happens? We just leave that and
They would die.
till they
Yep.
die and fall?
Yep.
So that's okay. So there's no cost really involved there. Do we replace them at that point, or?
It depends upon where they would be in a park and the how significant a number and an impact to the environment would be. And we regularly go through these areas of parks to make sure that we don't have any trees that are creating unsafe conditions. So we would let them die until they reach a more unsafe condition.
Okay.
Is there any proactive things that we can do now? I know that there are services that come and sell injections and things like that for trees. Do we think that between now and when we start construction, is there a proactive approach we could take to these trees that's a little bit of a different cost alternative, maybe even lower cost alternative to maintain the ash tree? Or is it not something that we're able to do until we actually have the budget and actually have the money?
There are injections that you can do for ash trees. The thing about the injections is they are not inexpensive, and you have to keep up with those injections annually. So it's not just a one-time cost where you inject it and the tree is going to be protected. You do have to come back and treat that annually. I believe that my forester told me that there are a few trees that are more specimen trees that are really large trees, that he is trying that approach on because they are of a higher value and something that we want to try to save. But it is not an approach that we would want to try in a situation like this where we have 111, definitely. I think it's worth noting too, the Minneapolis Park Board is responsible for the management of all the boulevard trees in the city of Minneapolis, and they have taken the approach of going through and proactively removing all of the ash trees and are replacing them at a very significant cost, but they feel that it's important to maintain the tree canopy in the city, so they're selectively going through and removing all the ash trees and replacing them.
Okay, we reviewed the kind of first stage in the design process for the park. We've got a new creek alignment we're looking at, have some more definition on stormwater. I think Ann and I and those that were out in the lobby for the public input open house pleasantly heard a lot of positive and constructive comments about where we are and the design elements of the park, which we've noted and appreciate. The next steps in this process summary, as Ann said, we're going to be back to the Park Commission as well as Council and our Board of Managers a couple more times during the design development process. Again in May with 60%, which is a decision point, and then at 90% later in September. The shelter building and playground design process is being led by the city kind of concurrently while we're working through this phase of design process. And I think the shelter building is going to get started here in about February with the playground to follow later this year. Staying informed, we have a link on the Watershed District project website to sign up for email updates, which we anticipate to be bi-weekly during design development. And then there is also a link on the city's website to a comment form, the same comment form we provided in hard copy in the hall tonight to provide your comments on various elements of the park, the creek, the stormwater, the trails, and you can submit those online. Just to note, the Watershed District communication staff as well as the City of Edina's communication staff are directly coordinating the communication plans for this project. And I think if you'd like to sign up for those email updates, I'd encourage you to do so. We'll be working together to put those out again bi-weekly, and that's through the Watershed District website, but we're really looking to make those cross links just to make it easy to stay informed. The meeting tonight was publicly noticed with a postcard to a little over 700 residents, that same mailing geography that we used during the concept plan development, and the second two community check-ins will be noticed that same way as well as through these other channels.
So we're happy to take any other questions or any other feedback that you might have this evening.
I have a couple. And knowing that we're at 30%, if this is stuff that we'll deal with, and maybe they become more comments than questions, but one I had, one of the things I had heard from a few folks was no one's really talked about what the benefits to Lake Minnetonka are, and I know that that's because maybe this doesn't necessarily affect us as community residents of Edina, since Lake Minnetonka is not a lake that we is part of our city. But I think that it's one of the things that I hear is that, you know, Minnehaha Creek meanders much. You said 47 square miles. I think there's a lot of other places that are benefiting from this. So I think if we can explain that, or at least touch on that in whatever communication that we have, I think that's important, because I think that's one of the things that I heard from some of the residents. That's, I guess, a comment. The questions I had, and if we haven't solved for this again, do we have a solve for the 54th Street Dam? Is there, was there any decisions made in terms of trying to make a babbling brook area or something was there anything like that? Because I know that was one of the points that was highly discussed prior. Is the rink going to be closed when the construction is going on, or next year when you said some of this stuff is going on? I think that's important to communicate, because I think that's one of the key rinks for four-man league and stuff like that. And then the two other things I had were the filtration and the bioretention stuff. Is there any byproducts to either of those? Examples, are there any smells and or the bioretention areas, because they're kind of wildlife? Are we going to see an influx of insects or things like that? I'm just thinking of that neighborhood and, some of the things that, while they want that rustic look, are we going to be bringing in more of some of the rustic elements that maybe they didn't really sign up for when they were looking to keep the rustic nature of the park?
Would you like a brief response tonight? Sure. First, the question to Lake Minnetonka, because it's upstream of the project, and further, there's really no impact to the amount of water or how fast water moves on either side of the park. So no impact to folks, by the height or rate of water upstream or downstream. No impact to Lake Minnetonka because it's upstream. What we have heard during design is, I think to that question, there's a bunch of impacts to the creek in that 47 or 22 mile route. And this doesn't get at many of them. And the watershed district, kind of going back to my introduction, knows that there's a lot of issues in the system, and we've got several studies going back decades that identify lots of issues in the creek system, and we take those, address those on an opportunity basis, and have really more of a long-term vision of addressing the issues of stormwater runoff, ditching, damming, and corridor fragmentation when opportunities to intersect our natural resource efforts align with those of our partners, like they do here in Arden Park. There's examples in St. Louis Park and Hopkins like they've done there. So this doesn't address other issues that we know are known, issues in the creek, but it's one opportunity at a time, and it addresses the issue of the dam and that creek connection of really connecting 9 miles of creek that are disconnected by the dam today.
Yeah, I think to be fully transparent, the perception that some folks had voiced to me was, we're going to fix this in Arden Park, and there's going to be some solve to the flow issue, so then the people that live out on Lake Minnetonka won't have to suffer the no wake issue that they had a couple summers ago when there's a ton of water. So I am not educated enough to answer that question, but that was the question that was posed to me. So
again, no impact on that. The aesthetic around the dam's a design level detail that we'll get to, but we have heard of the desire of the community to have some visual interest at that area, and as well as the recreational area to the north. I don't think we can speak to the closure of the rink yet, but we've heard that and we'll note that, so we appreciate that comment.
I think the one thing that I would add on that is I think it's safe to say that the open skate rink would be closed because of the construction. There is a chance potentially that we could keep the hockey rink open. And as we get into the next report in, I would be very interested to hear your feedback on that. The shelter building would be gone. So we would have an option potentially of just not having any facility there, or we could bring in a portable structure, like some sort of a trailer to act as a warming house. Might not be easy to get a trailer there. We would have to research that as well, because as you know, it's down a hill. That might be challenging. We are keeping very close attendance counts at all of our rinks, so we will be looking at that as part of a decision as well. But we'll definitely seek your feedback, because I know it is a very popular hockey rink.
The last thing I have is byproducts of the stormwater filtration. They generally don't smell because they're designed to flow through water, not have standing water. To the point about insects, pollinators was something of interest we heard during the concept plan development. So a consideration to a planting plan of those swales, in addition to their aesthetic, might be how they can provide habitat for pollinators, among other things. So those are a couple of the design considerations that we'll be looking at.
And I think I might also add to that, there is currently a significant amount of standing water in that area, and this plan is going to get the water moving. So that is only going to help those conditions.
Not so much a question, but I just would comment that I thought the open house was very well done. So Renee and Ross and Jonathan, and I know you had a couple others answering questions. I was expecting a more formal open house like we've had in some others, so walked in to see this more informal approach, but I thought it worked very well. People definitely interacting and asking a lot of good questions and giving comments. So I just wanted to say thanks and congratulations. I thought it was a well done session.
Well, I give credit to Ann and your team here at the city as well. Yeah.
Thank you, and I give credit to Renee and Ross.
And I would just say,
But thank you.
I felt like I saw this also publicized in a lot of different places. And I thought that, the postcards went out, but just the number of places that this showed up, I think was helpful for making sure that it was on folks' radar. So,
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next item on our agenda is the comprehensive plan update, and Greg's going to take us through where we are on that.
Sure. So if you can indulge me as a commission, I will speak for a little while, and then I will be quiet and allow all of you to give some inputs. I'm going to just review at a high level our next draft of our comprehensive plan. Did not get done in time to make our packet, but I believe it was emailed to each of you. So if you haven't had a chance to read it yet, please do so in the next week to 10 days to make sure we get as many inputs to it as we can. Just a high-level overview of what's included in our comp plan at this point. We've got about 9 different sections in the draft that I sent to you. Still very much aligned with what we had last month. But the first piece will be a general summary of Edina's current parks and facilities and programs. We will be engaging, Ann is helping us set up a meeting with BICO Consultants where we will begin to lean on them to provide some content for that section. The second section will be an executive summary of our comp plan. The third section that's involved in this right now are just some notes for us to keep track of what we want to follow up on or work on. That section will drop out. And then the next 5 sections are coming directly from our strategic plan, and there are 5 key areas of development, and that's how we've currently structured our 2018 comp plan, is to align around those 5 key areas of development. And then the last piece is just a holding spot at the moment for an implementation plan. Don't know if we'll need one or if that will be included, but we'll get some input from the consultants around what's needed there. So that's a high level of the structure of the comp plan. Embedded in the current draft, in those specifically those 5 sections around our key area of developments, are 23 policy items, and then underneath those policy items, 15 action items. So the intent has been to try to drive this around key development area, a policy that would fit each of those areas, and then if it's specifically implied or flows from that, an action item that we could then work on as we think about annual plans or more forward visioning and future thoughts. From the last time that we met, I did connect with Carolyn Jackson of the Energy and Environmental Commission, and she had some good inputs from their commission, very much like we were engaging with the Transportation Commission today. And so those inputs have not yet been added to the draft. We just connected on Friday, but we'll take some of those and improve the draft that we have right now. Otherwise, I think at a high level, from just reviewing it myself, I do recognize that it needs to be still more forward-looking, right? A lot of what we've got in this current draft, from my perspective, is thinking from our strategy, really how things exist today. And if this is indeed a 10-year view, how do we make sure that we have more forward-looking content in it? And I think much like what the Transportation Commission was trying to say today, let's just not think about today's problems, but what problems are we trying to set ourselves up to consider in the future. And then, of course, an opportunity to add all of your inputs. It is not too late. So we'll continue to want to take those. But before I pause and just allow you to give some comments and inputs on that, let me give you a sense of what the timeline is going forward. So for the draft that you have in front of you today, what I would ask for is inputs by Friday, January 19th. And at that point, I'll take all of the inputs that we've got and start working on a third version draft. As I mentioned, Ann is working on a meeting with our consultants, so that's still to be determined. But we'll then have our first meeting with the consultant team, show them our draft, begin to get their insights on where we need to improve it and how we begin to make sure that it connects with the other chapters that are being done by other commissions. Third step will then be the third draft we'll shoot for in our February meeting packet. So hopefully be able to carve out some more time in February to have some dialogue and some inputs and discussion. Finalize after that any further inputs from that meeting, as well as other boards and commissions. So we do have it ourselves an action item to continue to try to connect with other commissions. And so those inputs will get into the last part of February. And then we will have a final draft at our March 13th meeting, which will then be presented to the Planning Commission. I think we have a date still set right now, Ann, on March 28th, if my notes are correct, right? So
I'm not sure that date couldn't change.
Sure.
But that's the date that we've been given so far.
So as our timeline looks today, that's when we'd want to have a final plan to give to the Planning Commission for them then to review and give us any more formal feedback and decisions on. So that's where we stand as far as current structure of the draft and timeline moving forward. And as promised, I will now stop talking and let others give any inputs you might have.
I'll start again. The comment you made, Greg, about forward-thinking or forward-looking state things resonated with me just because I like the financial management section. And then some of the stuff around the programs and things like that. I think of the website and how are we going to utilize this new website that we just had, a new branding website, to further help in the, first of all the different ways that we can access both finding the parks, understanding the park system, information about the parks, but then signing up for all of our recreation programs, financial management. I think we as a collective unit understand that is where a lot of commerce and those things are going. I think this is an opportunity to put pen to paper and say that we as a commission would like to see us best utilize the asset that we have of our website and do the due diligence of how to do that. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I do pretend to tell you that the current situation is probably not ideal when you look at some of the things that we have seen from when summer sign-up happens and how deep in the website some of the information is. So again, like you said, 10-year forward-looking statements, it's hard to understand.
Yep.
If it's really the internet, in 10 years it might be something different. I don't know, but that would be the one thing that I would say. So,
good, thank you. Others?
I know this is, meant to be aspirational, and I really appreciate all the time you've put into it. You've organized it very well, and you've communicated very well. It's excellent. The one thing that always was popping up in my head as I was reading it is, how's this going to get paid for? How's this going to get paid for? How's this going to get paid for? I hate to be that guy, but when does that aspect start to get addressed, if at all, in this plan?
So I don't have a specific answer for you. I think we're walking a bit of a line, as I've worked on drafting this, between establishing policy to guide us, but then from that, action plans will fall out on an annual basis that will then be driven more towards, okay, now this has to be funded, right? So I don't intend, at least we haven't in this current draft, to try to then create funding. We did have something in here that came from some of our discussions about a policy towards becoming more creative and how we develop funding and bring in other. So certainly do want to call that aspect of it out. But I think, as we've all recognized before, we don't control any purse strings, but we certainly want to kind of bring the plans to the city council and be able to communicate and, if need be, argue succinctly about why they should be a priority.
And maybe I didn't read the finance and management part, if you would talk about it in there, but that's probably a good, what you said there is probably a good overarching statement somewhere in here, so that when people read it,
it helps them understand where that comes from, right?
Yeah,
not from us,
more
but
of a guiding policy than a plan.
Okay, good input.
I have a quick clarifying question about under the recreation facilities. I remember in the old one, when I read it, it had a part in there where it was looking for expanding on AstroTurf fields. It kind of looking, I don't know, that was one of the goals or something to look for. And it says multi-purpose athletic fields. Is that intended to include AstroTurf fields and that type of stuff? Because when I hear kids my age and stuff, we refer to some of the AstroTurf fields as like multi-purpose fields. Sometimes people refer to those, so I was wondering if that's something. Is the multi-purpose athletic fields referring to that? Because I know with like the addition of the AstroTurf fields right by the high school and over by the community center, it's like 3 big fields. Potentially you could utilize them to be like 5. So was that referring to, something like that where it can be used for a bunch of different sports, or AstroTurf, or was just in general like the grass ones we see at like Lewis?
Good question. I think if I recall the transition from the last comp plan to this, as we were working through that, my intent was multi-purpose in consideration of use for literally multi-sports, multi-activities, not necessarily what type of field it would need to be, not trying to be prescriptive at this point around what we think the type of field might be. Because again, that might change, or our opportunities for that might change 2 years, 5 years, 8 years from now. So it would leave the actual decision around type of field to the commission at that time, and not try to be prescriptive here in policy. Now, doesn't mean that that's the right answer. If we wanted to take a stance on saying, we believe in 2018, looking out 10 years, it should be X, this is certainly the opportunity that we could make that statement, but that's not what I was intending to do here by talking about that multi-purpose.
No, yeah, I think that's great. That's exactly what I was just clarifying. I think that's a great idea.
But certainly open to that if others think that we could change that, but that wasn't the intent.
Sure, thank you.
The only thing I'm pondering if we should have in there, there are types of activities that we've had in there over months or years past that we were kind of told to take off of our docket in terms of, so for example, like partnerships for financing and things like that, or marketing and communications. Is there something in here that we should put in out of scope, or potential ideas or something? I feel like we should capture in here things that we have had on our plan or our idea log that we have been asked to not pursue. Just so if in 10 years we're not all sitting here, these aren't like big ahas, like, oh my gosh, like where have we at on this? I think that it'd be good to at least call out some of the things that we would like to pursue, but are not on our top priority based on the council's feedback. I'm not sure how I would put that, but I'm pondering the thought, I should say.
So one thought, and we probably won't be able to pull out the exact one just as I'm looking at it here, but some of the things that actually were holdovers from 2008 that we've still got in now were, for example, Edina, the Recreation Park Department is open to explore partnerships to expand indoor exercise and fitness facilities for Edina residents. So look at things that we could be saying, should we be building this ourselves, or should we be partnering with surrounding communities? And then we had a little bit of discussion in the strategic plan as well about even if that partnership was with a commercial entity and not just somebody else. So there are still some things in here around whether it's field use, whether it's enterprise use, whether it's becoming more creative in how we create funding for assets that we want. It's attempting to at least highlight that as a policy that we would not object to.
I absolutely think you're right on that. I just want to understand if we're using this plan as holding ourselves accountable. If someone came to us and said, hey, who's talking to Lifetime at Southdale? How are we partnering to let Edina residents have some form of a partnership? I couldn't speak to it. So, I want to make sure that if this is our plan of saying these are things that we're trying to do, that we are holding ourselves accountable to them. If it's things that are just ideas that are things we're tabling or maybe in or out of scope, that we have them captured, but that we're captured differently. So if this whole comprehensive plan is something to hold us accountable and say, here's all the things that we're looking to try to do in the next 10 years, that we are, and if it's things that are just, these are the things we're for sure doing versus the ideas, I just think it's important to at least have it someplace that we're calling that out.
And so again, and Ann, your insight to correct if we're off on the wrong path here, but they're kind of parallel paths for me, is I would look at the comprehensive plan is setting policy and guidelines that we would need to consider when we're making decisions around action plans.
Okay.
It's not intended to replicate or replace the strategic plan that we put in place. That from what I hear your insight, Corin, I might go to our strat plan and say, what has that told us about what we would want to try to accomplish? And if we went in a different direction, someone might challenge us to say, well, how does that fit with the policy that you have in your comp plan? You said you do this and not this, and now you're going towards this. So not intended to be a strategic plan that we take those types of actions from, but more an umbrella that gives us guiding principles almost, if you would, for looking out 10 years. Is that in alignment, Ann, with what you'd expect we're trying to accomplish?
Yes, I agree as well, Greg.
Okay. Does that make sense, Corin?
Thanks.
Anyone else? Otherwise, do please keep reviewing it. Send your comments to Janet. She'll be glad, I think, to gather them, pass them along to me. I'm going to add what I heard from the Energy and Environmental Commission, and about 10 days from now, we'll start working on another draft, which I will then be sharing with our smaller working group for some other insights from the working group, and get draft number 3 ready for our February meeting. Okay.
Good.
All right.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Thanks for taking the lead on this project, too. We really appreciate that. You're just doing a fantastic job with it. Okay, so the next item are chair and member comments, and so I'd like to open it up to all the commissioners and see if anyone has any additional comments they'd like to share. Anything? Okay, great. Well, we'll turn it over now to Ann for staff comments.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. First of all, I'd like to make an introduction. We have a new member at the dais today. Debbie Townsend is a communications coordinator for the city. And Debbie's going to be working at the dais for us, replacing Dawn. Dawn has done a fantastic job, but I am excited to report that Debbie is now going to be focusing approximately 50% of her full-time efforts towards the Park and Recreation Department. So for the first time ever, we're going to have someone that is going to be specifically responsible for our department from a communication standpoint. And it's great for us for a lot of reasons, but it's a two-way street. Debbie is incredibly talented. She is holding our staff accountable of things that we need to be doing better, and it's also providing the consistency that's going to help us to have one point of contact who knows a lot about what's going on in the department. So I'm very excited to have Debbie at the dais and Debbie working with our department more closely. A few updates on some things that we have going on in the department. Some of you may already know, I sent an email out. The City Council on January 3rd approved the Braemar Park Master Plan. It was very well received, so that was a great night for us. Thank you so much for all of your help in getting that plan complete. I did talk to the City Council about your recommendation about putting together kind of a prioritization plan of how we would like to see some of those different parts of the project potentially implemented. So that would be the next step that we'll be working on, and I would like to work specifically with the members of the Parks and Rec Commission that are assigned to that project. Corin also volunteered to help with that as well. So I'll be reaching out to you in the next few days to talk about when we could get together to talk about prioritizing the projects in the Braemar Park Master Plan. So again, thank you for all of your hard work on that. Wanted to let you know that on Monday, January 22nd, there is going to be an open house for the possible redevelopment at the old Public Works site. It'll be in the lobby of City Hall, and I apologize, I forgot to put the time. Do you know? I think it's in the same time range as our open house was, but I'm not going to say specifically. But it is on Monday, January 22nd in the City Hall lobby, early evening. Edinburgh Park hosted their very popular annual New Year's Eve party on Friday, December 29th. It wasn't great weather this year. It was cold, the roads were bad, but we still had 250 paid admissions for that event. People typically bring anywhere from 2 to 4 adults with them. So that was a really good turnout, and we had a lot of positive feedback. We had a very busy holiday season between December 24th and 31st. We had 6,255 paid admissions at the park. And remember, that's not including adults, because adults are free. So we had a very, very busy time at Edinburgh Park. Speaking of busy, so far we've had over 9,700 skaters at our outdoor rinks. The most popular rink so far this year has been Countryside with 1,150 skaters, followed closely by Arden with 1,120. So it's been a great skating season, even though we had some prohibitively cold weather about a week ago. The Art Center hosted 3 openings on Thursday, January 4th in the Margaret Foss Gallery. There is Ola Cuba, photographs by Barbara Lavallure. In the Tea Room Gallery, we have work by Potter Mary Weisgrum, and the exhibit is Hot Pots and Hot Dish. And in the Clark Gift Shop, we have a pop-up show featuring Saori weavings by students attending the Minnesota Life College. The Art Center will be hosting the 19th Annual Potters Games on Monday, January 15th. The Art Center is typically closed on that day, but we will be having this pottery competition that has been really popular over the years. And we do have pre-registration, and children's ages 15 and younger must be accompanied by an adult. And the price is $10 with lunch included. Lots going on in our Gulf enterprise as well. We have an optional walkthrough for our restaurant request for proposal The date of that is January 24th, and the submission deadlines for the request for proposal is February 7th. We started an indoor bags league in January. We have junior camps starting in January, junior development starting in January. Our Starting New at Golf program starts in late January. We have more adult programming that's starting at the Dome in late January, and we have demo days beginning in February. A couple of things at Centennial Lakes Park. We have our 27th annual Winter Ice Festival taking place this Sunday from 1 to 5. If you haven't been to one, please attend. It's a really, really great event. Hopefully we have good weather this year. We also have the Quinn's Cup Pond Hockey Tournament that's coming up. It'll be held on Saturday, January 29th, and it sounds like we're going to have a record number of teams participating in that. And then lastly for me, Senior Center, we've been really ramping up the amount of programming that we're doing there. In 2016, we offered 46 programs with 612 participants. In 2017, we had 82 programs with 1,061 participants. And our current Senior Center membership is at 1,094 members. And then, Susan, if you would be so kind, I would like her to give just a quick update on spring and summer registrations.
Yeah, so Ann talked about all of how busy we are this time of year, but wait until about 3 or 4 months. So summer program registration starts on February 20th for residents. The 26th of February for non-residents. We're hoping to have all of that information online around February 8th approximately, and then our activities directory should hit homes on February 12th. So there have been some improvements made, number one, to the website. One area that caused a lot of error in the past has been on the signing in. So on the registration page, there was a sign-in option, and that was actually confusing to people because it was actually signing in to the website, the city website, as opposed to our registration page. So that's been removed. So we feel like the process will go smoothly this summer. We had some issues a couple years ago. Last summer and last fall and winter, registration went really smoothly. Still, we had some user errors, but also the actual site is a little bit more user-friendly for mobile devices now too. So if you haven't already, if you're planning on registering for programs, I would set up your account early so you don't have to do that first day of registration. That'll save some time. So, thanks.
Do accounts need to be set up every year? Or if we were set up last year, are we still set up this year?
Yeah, correct. You only have to set up the account one time, as long as you remember like your username and your password.
Good.
Okay, good. Well, wow, that's a lot of stuff going on and a good way to start the new year. So thank you for that update. And welcome, Debbie, to the team. And thank you, Dawn, for all your work. Really appreciate that. So with that, I know the calendar of events is also included, so you can make sure those are on your calendars. And we probably will have a couple offsites. I know they're not identified yet, but we'll do that similar to what we have in the past. And with that, that brings us to the end of our meeting. So if I could have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.
On the nuts.